I'm stoked to be here. Gosh, and what an impressive array of agencies and abilities. So I'm delighted to present to you my work in Silver City, New Mexico. This is a community near Silver City called Bayard. And I was driving down the highway, having a lot of fun hydroplaning. I don't think that's probably the best use of our water resources, is to make it like a fun zone for crazy drivers. This is in Columbus, New Mexico. I did a project there a long time ago, and it rained. This is a street we didn't do a project on. Look at the water is making an arroyo, a meandering arroyo down the street and going past people's yards and gardens. In my town, a bunch of sediment from dirt roads and driveways gets dumped on paved city streets during a storm, and it costs about $1 per citizen to clean up after an average storm. I've been working with the streets department, and we're fixing these streets one at a time. This is 11th Street. You can see sediment is getting parked on basically handicap access to a sidewalk. So we worked with the streets department to turn off that sediment supply. There's a project we did. So this is up the block where you can see this is actually erosion. This is where the sediment's coming from, and this is where the pavement starts. So we have, a dumping monsoon storm goes on dirt 11th Street and brings a lot of sediment down onto paved 11th Street. So we did a project here in front of Connie's house, and this was, we do this as an iterative process. It's a design, build, monitoring, adjustment process. We started by diverting the high sediment yield stormwater from dirt 11th Street and cleaned this out, made adjustments upstream on 11th Street on the dirt part, and got that flowing to across Connie's driveway. And we're working with thyme and sediment and vegetation. We're getting the Bermuda grass to grow and stabilize the new arroyo crossing on her driveway. And there's a diversion that we created. So here's another cleaner flow after we worked with the city on how they were maintaining that. Western New Mexico University has a great race, and they create a mud bog situation to push the carts through, and that created a huge sediment supply. And so now we're going to build their mud bog for them next time so that it doesn't create a high sediment supply. It's a lot's going on to fix 11th Street. Then we added a 8-inch pipe diversion through a burn basin, and it can either go into Connie's garden or Abel's garden or stay on 11th Street. So these people, they get many hundreds of dollars worth of free water with each storm. We're eliminating sediment from coming down the street at the same time. That's that same corner again, in which we deepened the inlet. You can see there's a steel plate across the sidewalk and a ditch, and that goes to 11 tree basins all the way to the end of the block. Abel Duffy planted trees, and it's on the city right-of-way, so anybody can cruise along and get an apple when they're walking down the sidewalk. Okay. Can you play the 11th Street video, Mike? Multitasking Mike is amazing. You can see the diversion. It's blocked off.
I'm going to mute it and you can narrate it.
Okay. Then the pipe goes through a berm to a pool. And if you have a pool, you can have two equal elevation outlets. One goes to Connie's. It goes through that coyote fence and it flows along the border in that there's a kind of a trench, and it goes to her garden, and her garden got 2 inches deep of water during that storm, and then Abel came and blocked it off and sent that into his garden and down the street to the corner. Now it's sediment-free water going down the city street, and the way streets are generally designed is to convey water to a storm system. We'll take water out of the gutter. Sometimes we'll put it back in the gutter. So we're utilizing the gutter to distribute flows to sponges along the way. And so this is just showing how the street does not have sediment in it anymore, and now it's getting into that gutter. We totally deepened that gutter cut, and the water goes into that basin under the steel plate and to a series, I think there's 11 or 13 basins and channels from tree to tree to tree to tree to tree, all the way to the end of the block. Now we can take a pretty good storm and no sediment goes down 11th Street anymore, and all of the water soaks into the ground to grow food, beauty, habitat, shade, windbreak, all for free. All right, back to the... Okay, I've got 3 videos, that was one of them. Okay, this is in Ruidoso. Okay, there's a grocery store, and their stormwater goes from their roof across their parking lot, through a culvert, and out onto the street. I understand Ruidoso has some kind of a stormwater problem. I wonder why. The reason is because they spent millions of dollars to create a problem unwittingly, because they're not putting the water into a sponge. Everything everybody does collects the water into the river so that it will peak as soon as possible with as much sediment and pollution as possible. This is how our world is being built right now, and this needs to change. Then it goes into some culvert that dumps directly into the stream. During a monsoon, typically it dawns clear, it gets real hot, the pavement gets hot. If you're lucky, it'll rain around 2 or 3 p.m. And I wear sandals. I go out in front of my office into College Street, and the water is warm. We're putting a big fast rush of warm water with a bunch of dog poo in it down the street and into the stream. That's how it is right now. But check it out. This is a huge opportunity because we've spent millions and millions of dollars creating all this concrete, asphalt, street, curb and gutter, water collection systems. And now, for just a few $100, I can cut a concrete curb and put that collected water into a whole bunch of places. Anybody who wants this water, if the engineering works out, they're going to get a bunch of free water. So this is off Copia Street on I-10 in El Paso. This is a project I love to hate. They condemned houses by eminent domain and built a pair of giant stormwater projects, concreted them in, fenced it off with barbed wire. There's a 10-foot diameter culvert that runs under I-10 to balance the flow. Cost $50 million. Okay? That would have done $5,000, $10,000 projects. This watershed could have 5,000 rain gardens. Every median, every yard that has the right topography could have diverted water into that. We could have greened that whole part of the city instead of evaporating it in a concrete basin. And, you know, about 11 years ago, I had the Aldo Leopold High School YCC kids find every single storm drain in town and put these stickers on them. And they also came up with 200 locations where we could do water harvesting. And I've done about 100 of those so far. This is based on the very important work by Brad Lancaster from Tucson. I highly recommend everybody get this book, pass it around. I'll sell it to you at my cost, or you can get it off his website. And there's this book. So basically, this is the constructed world in which roof runoff doesn't go into the tree basin. They're running the hose and the water meter to keep the trees alive. You plant a tree, you put a ringed berm around it, and that keeps local surface runoff from accessing the tree. So all of our surface runoff goes down the street towards the storm system. That's the convex. Concave. If water gets directed to the sponge, we're drawing water off the street instead of putting water on the street. This is it doesn't take very much work to do this. You just have to be smart about it. You have to do a little bit of on-site engineering. This is the first water harvesting curb cut I did 15 years ago in Silver City.
I see my instructions there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Mike. Okay, this is Corbin Street, getting a bunch of water out of the gutter into this guy's yard, and that basin overflows into another basin, and then there's another curb cut. Some more water's going into there. Now, there's a lot less water going down the gutter, and then old Bill Bailey is grabbing it all. And then he taught me a lesson. What he did was, see, my work ends. He made that ditch and cut through the coping, and he flooded the corner of his front yard with it. And then that water is now weeping through another low wall and soaking into the ground on the city-owned median. And then what happened to all that stormwater? It all soaked into the ground on 2 pieces of property in a city median. Problem solved. How much did that cost?
$50.
You know what I mean? It's like compared to a ginormous engineering project, and the typical scenario is to allow water from private to go into public and concentrate it and concentrate it and concentrate it until down at the bottom we need to do a giant, ugly, concrete thingamajob. Okay, that's the plan. I don't agree with that plan. So, this guy's awesome. Brad Lancaster, my gosh. His book has been translated into several languages. How many people have you sent to Watershed Management Group to get the water harvesting certification?
On my staff, I have 2 people. I just learned the other day, though, that a few other folks in El Paso were inspired by me to go get that certification through the talks that I've given like this. So, 5?
Wow.
It feels
Gosh.
like it should be more. I don't know.
I went in 2010. Claire went, Martha went, Jacqueline went, and a lady from the New Mexico Environment Department went a long time ago. Yeah, so this is a principled and ethical man who has developed the water harvesting principles and ethics. I'm going to run quickly through those and then jam through a whole bunch of different water harvesting projects that I did. Each one's different. So begin with long and thoughtful observation. Question everything you've been told, everything you think you know. When there's a hard rain and you're looking out the window, sometimes it starts raining a hell of a lot harder than that. That's when you need to run outside and go to your projects. Look at your own yard, your own driveway. One day I realized my shed roof was starting the arroyo to have stormwater before it ordinarily would have. Relook at everything, rethink everything. Figure out a clever way to move one shovelful of dirt to make a difference. And that one shovelful of dirt will make the most difference if you start at the top of the watershed. If you're a homeowner, the top of your watershed of influence is your roof. Where does your rain gutter dump water? Where does your driveway go? Start small and simple. That took 10 minutes to dig a little berm and basin so that concentrated water from an area that didn't have that much vegetation went to a tiny ponderosa tree. You know? This is what it's about. This is what Connie was talking about. The watershed has a watershed area, and you don't do a giant $50 million thing at the bottom. You do many hundreds of tiny projects at the incipient point of flow. And spread and infiltrate the flow of water. Look for places to take concentrated water and direct it to a sponge so it'll soak into the ground. Always have an overflow. And the overflow shouldn't go in the back door of somebody's house, okay? Typically in an urban water harvesting, stormwater situation, I'll take water off the street, put it into somebody's yard, and have the overflow go back to the exact same street gutter it came from with no sediment and with a lot less water. Typically, the overflow won't flow because we're trying to capture as much water as we can. There's a lot to say about this, and also, anybody has a question? Please ask me a question. Do you have a question?
I don't at this moment.
Do you have a question?
I don't yet.
Do you have a question? Please ask me questions. Let's mix it up. You ask me a question. Ask me a hard question. I'd like to have a little bit of discussion. I want to show you a bunch of stuff. And if you have a question, please, let's segue to it.
Okay, what is the planned maintenance for the sediment, or for dropping off the sediment in the first pond? Because it's
Right
gonna
on.
build up.
Thank you, Davina. Right on. Okay, so
Repeat the question?
what's the planned maintenance for the first basin? Because it's going to need to be maintained or it's going to mess up. Okay, first of all, I design projects so that the failure mode is back to how it was before with berms and redirection, so that if nobody does the maintenance, the failure mode is the water goes where it used to go before the project was done, so I don't create a new problem. Okay? Then Stream Dynamics does the maintenance for the first few storms until we have refined the project and have discovered exactly what maintenance needs to be done, where the sediment needs to come from, where it needs to go to. If the project isn't working correctly, we will redesign it and rebuild it. And when the project is working correctly, we're operating on a river stewardship grant. Thank you very much. And we're spending state funds on private property, but there has to be a landowner agreement. Everything's according to law. The landowner, we're not going to do a project unless the landowner agrees to do the maintenance for 10 years. And I hope that 10 years from now, we will have revolutionized the way New Mexico views stormwater. And I'm going to keep shoving this in the direction I think it should go. But I got a 10-year reprieve before I have to deal with maintaining all these projects. Maximize living in organic ground cover. It's all about the soil fungus that is interdigitized with the end of all the tree roots. And so it's about creating a living soil sponge that, you ever have a drippy kitchen sink and you go under there and you peel something up and it's all like nasty fungus situation? Fungus can latch onto moisture and hold it for a real long time and transport it vast distances underground to all the vegetation that needs it. And so if we have living organic ground cover, we will have this collaboration with the soil fungus, and that's what makes a sponge. If an engineer does an infiltration test on bare ground and designs a project based on that, they're not paying attention to what's going to happen over time. Because when you redirect water, you change what the percolation rate is going to be. And so you have to have a long-term perspective of what you're doing as water managers, as water harvesters. And instead of designing one project that's going to solve one problem and probably create 3 new problems, you have to have like a global perspective and try to cleverly, simultaneously solve a whole bunch of problems at once. How is this land being used currently? What does the landowner do? You can see where they walk. You can see where they park. You can get a feel for how this space is being used, needs to be used by society. And the challenge is to add one more use, water harvesting, that will not be in conflict with all those other uses. And then go back. You need to go back to your project, the first storm, the big storms, and keep going back to your project and see, probably it's not going to work exactly how you had designed. You might need to rethink and redo, and you need to keep going back until it's working how it needs to work. That's how we've been learning. I've been doing this for 15 years in Silver City. This is an old diagram. There's twice as many projects in town now. So thanks to a river stewardship grant from the New Mexico Environment Department, we're in the middle of building 100 free water harvesting projects. If it's on the city-owned right-of-way in front of your house, in my town, it's the landowner's responsibility to pick up trash and control weeds on the city-owned right-of-way in front of their house. And so then we worked with the Environment Department and the town of Silver City, and we have a landowner agreement. If you want a water harvesting project on the city right-of-way in front of your house, you have to agree to maintain it for 10 years. And there's several different versions of the agreement to accommodate every scenario. We review each project. Our contract manager reviews each project. Some get denied. If you're a state employee, there's a bunch of reasons, but we go through all of the bureaucracy and we get to a bunch of people who are getting free projects in my town. I took a concrete bore drill and a crazy machinist inventor guy and made this contraption that holds it just right to punch a clean hole right through a curb. And Mike has the exact same machine. So this is Diane's house on 12th Street. And so what we did there is we made this clean borehole to take water out of the street gutter and put it in a teeny little depression, and she put her potted plants in there. And, it's better than it was. It's taking a teeny little bit of water in a teeny little median and making a teeny little bit better. Why not? Not all of them are that teeny. So this is Jennifer's house on Spring Street, and the neighbor lady had an idea, because we're thinking about, we want to cut the curb and put it on here, but this is uphill, there's all this concrete. She said, why don't you cut it there and take the water that's coming off Jennifer's roof and going down the sidewalk and take that out? She taught me a lesson. So we did that, and the Environment Department approved that, and so pretty easy project. So now there's a little bit of rain garden, and instead of having Jennifer's roof runoff go down the street, it's going into a little rain garden, like that. Every single place it's feasible to cost effectively cause a little bit of water to soak in the ground, that's what we need to do. How else are we going to accomplish the objectives Connie outlined. So this is Julie B. Good's Last Ditch Cafe, and that's Bullard Street in Silver City. The stormwater that goes down Bullard Street now soaks into the ground because the city helped us remove some concrete, and you can't really see. There's a water channel here, and she planted a fruit tree and a bench, and she's working on more wildflowers.
From that
Yeah,
to that.
thank you, Mike. Yeah, great. So, as Connie said, the water doesn't follow our laws. It just goes downhill, more accurately. Negative hydraulic gradient. But water goes downhill, okay? But look, the purple is city streets right-of-way. All the other land is private land. Guess what? The sponge is not on city right-of-way. So if we want to fix the stormwater in a meaningful way, we need to direct it onto private land. Duh. Okay? So, city government, the Environment Department, all you agencies, we're not going to fix the problem in towns unless we take street runoff and direct it onto private property. I've done it 60 times in Silver City, and for the ISC, just so that you know, Silver City is in the Members Basin, a closed, unadjudicated basin. Who's ISC? In the back. Yeah. Silver City is in a closed, unadjudicated basin, and there's also a firewall between NMED and ISC and the Office of the State Engineer. I was at a conference. The Office of the State Engineer approves this type of project, and you can check it out if you don't believe me. Okay? This is all completely legal in the state of New Mexico because new impervious areas in cities create a new source of water, and there's an obligation to manage that water in an environmentally safe way by causing it to soak into the ground within a certain time period, and all the projects do that. So water's going down the street into this basin system, and then it goes in a pipe under, what's her name's driveway, and comes out into the side yard and irrigates some apple trees. Instead of taking hot dog poo infested water and running it down the street and out of town in our water course.
But Van,
Yeah,
you just said you're taking hot dog poop infested water,
Yeah.
and instead of putting it in the creek down the street, you're putting it in somebody's private property.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people would just say, not in my backyard. But what happens? What happens to that water when it does what you're making it do?
it soaks into the ground in a mulched basin that has a developing ecology where the topsoil easily bioremediates a lot of different pollution and nutrients and makes it available for plants. And the University of Arizona chemistry department is studying how this happens. Great question.
So you're creating biofiltration in your stormwater projects.
We're cleaning the water and letting it infiltrate into the ground in a whole bunch of places all over town, which is way better than shunting it in a concrete gutter and dumping it directly into the watercourse. So Gordon wanted a water harvesting project, but the water went down the other side of his street and the city wouldn't make a speed bump for me there. And so his buddy Jeff said, well, you can cut the curb on me, and they're sharing the water and it goes into Gordon's backyard. Okay, so this is the curb cut. Our streets are old. Our sidewalks were made in 1935. That's not my work, but I cut through an old eroding curb to go to a clean-out basin pipe along the side of a wall that dumps out, and it goes through Jeff's backyard and through Gordon's fence into his wife's garden. So this is Jerry Egan's place. The blue boundary is the urban subwatershed that drains right past Jerry's house. So we took out an 18-inch wide piece of concrete curb and gutter and put a 3-inch pipe under the sidewalk. Why not? So this is Kristen's place, and there's an urban subwatershed of 9.2 acres, and typically cities have a street grid that has nothing to do with the landform it was imposed upon, and typically the city blocks have a 6-inch high concrete curb, keeping water out of the original valley bottom. Okay, look at this. Here's the valley bottom. Here's private land sponge, but it's keeping the water, and it actually goes onto Highway 180. That stormwater is constrained to stay on US Highway 180 in Silver City, creating a traffic hazard. So we irrigated Kristen's backyard, went out the back, and put real water in one of those fake landscaping streams with a bridge over it. And the overflow, if any, goes into the gutter. You have to build an overflow. Ideally, you'll have a big enough sponge so that your overflow won't be necessary. So that's what we did. We did a very boring looking storm gutter that goes into a 6-inch pipe under the sidewalk. And there's a locking stainless steel knife valve. Since her property is below grade, I want to be very careful. Okay? Everything is done deliberately. We try to think of every single possibility and accommodate for that. It turns out that after a year of careful testing, she keeps it locked open all the time. It's locked because we didn't want somebody to adjust that in an unauthorized way. It goes in a ditch and in a pipe under her garden wall and in her backyard. There's all kinds of berms and basins and ditches and a huge, beautiful garden that gets all the water from a 9.2 acre urbanized watershed. Okay, here's Jackie Cusick's. There's her watershed, and you can see it has a pretty good area, several streets. And this is one of the 2 projects we did for her. We cut the curb, put it under her fence, and into her backyard. She's all happy. And I asked her, what about mosquitoes? And she said, well, Usually the water soaks into the ground within 24 hours and I don't have a problem. But if it keeps raining and raining like we really want, it might be a problem, but she taught me a lesson. She puts these mosquito dunks in her basin. It's totally organic. It's got some Thuringiensis or something. Anyway, we got that figured out. The mosquito thing is not a problem with water harvesting. And I'll tell you what, the real problem with mosquitoes is because water collects in random, uncared for places all over town. It doesn't soak into the ground on concrete and asphalt, and it can persist for long enough for mosquitoes to grow. And so really, the solution for that is water harvesting. Get that water to drain to the land where over time an ecology will develop to increase the absorptivity of that water. Water doesn't sit there in a water harvesting basin because it's mulched. There's earthworms, there's grass and trees and wildflowers growing there that absorb that water relatively quickly. So this is the end of 8th Street in Silver City with a mosquito problem because they just stopped. At the end of 8th Street, they stopped construction, went back home, never thought about the fact that they had created a ponding situation. So I cleaned that out with the backhoe and did a little subtle grinding to the street and gutter and put mulch in a basin. And now that water soaks into the ground to irrigate those trees instead of evaporating on the street in front of her driveway. So water harvesting cures mosquito problems. This is Mountain View Road in Silver City, creating a traffic hazard. And how are you going to get to the mailbox without getting your feet wet? So I reshaped the verge of the road and cut through a berm and let water down into Nathan's yard and planted a tree, and it's better than it was. It's safer for people on the street. So here's a storm gutter. It's partially filled in with dirt. This is during construction at the bottom of Mobile Drive in Silver City. And so I plugged that storm, because that storm gutter was taking water from a big, long, steep, wide street and putting it in a concrete thing and dumping it off an arroyo bank, made a horrible gully at the end of the concrete thing. And concrete chunks are falling down the bank. You've seen that all over town. So what we did was busted a hole in the side of that coping and took that piece out and put it there and turned this concrete drain into a footpath. And now water goes into a series of basins and then it crosses the concrete drain. Okay, let's go. Okay, there's going to be a video of that later. I have another couple of videos. So this is April's house on 6th Street in Silver City. Super basic project, borehole to a basin. Look at that. She has the option of taking a shovel and ditching this out and having it go across her land. And oftentimes people expand upon the basic projects we do with state funding and we coach them through it. We're trying to start a revolution here. Nikki's place. She was a waitress at Little Toad Creek in Silver City on roller skates, and she never messed up. And so she wanted a water harvesting project. We cut her curb and that water goes into her backyard. Okay, Mike, can you play another? This is from last summer. That's Anderson's. Okay, it's going to get a borehole. Okay, and there it is. Not all the water's going in the borehole. Okay, some of it stays in the gutter, and the next guy down has a borehole. This is Barb Stone's borehole, full of water. There's opportunity for her neighbor to collect some of that water. This is the other side of her property. We went under the sidewalk, and water goes into her backyard, and we did a Berman basin there, and it's irrigating a very large Arizona cypress that had been not doing so well. Now it's doing really well. Luck Street in Silver City, big old curb cut, went under a stone wall into the kind of corner lot yard and created a huge, beautiful sponge. Oh, this is Trux's place. That's me on the saw. Diversion. And there's kind of a montage of different storm events. I should update this now. It has all kinds of beautiful yellow flowers. This is, what's her name? Off Georgia Street. Huge amount of water going through the fence onto her private property. She moved the RV. The wildflowers are this tall there now. Nikki's place, grinding the cut, stormwater going into her backyard. Okay, that's Connie's diversion flowing. That's before we did. Okay, I want to talk about that sediment a little bit later, and this is that storm drain deal. Water's not going down the concrete thingamajob anymore because we're letting it moisten the sponge instead. And then when I needed to, I crossed the darn concrete thing, used it as a channel, and dumped it off onto the other side. And all that water is soaking into the ground instead of going off the end of a concrete thing, which was falling into the gully it had made. Okay, where were we? Cool. Thanks, Mike. Gosh. There's another storm drain letting water into a little side yard. In this block of Silver City, it's a city block, everybody's house is kind of distorted towards the street, and there's a huge area of privately owned sponge, and I'm trying to convince her neighbors to want the water because, see that it has the same locking gate valve, but she can only let a little bit in because her little side yard can only accept so much. She has to regulate that. If I could convince the other people in her block to accept the water, we could leave it open all the time and people would have a huge garden, trees, giant infiltration gallery.
So then why don't they? Why don't they want it? What's the pushback on that?
You know, people get paranoid and suspicious. The typical thing is to shunt the water away and to be mistrustful. But over time, I think perception is shifting as they see their neighbors' yards green up. I live in a small town, 10,000 people, and the city manager, the public works director, the streets director, the parks director. I've been working with them for a long time, and finally it's at the point where they're starting to call us up and say, can you help us fix this problem? So Las Cruces has a very large bureaucracy. We did a workshop in 2012, and we were going to do a curb cut in the city hall parking lot where a puddle was forming, but the city couldn't permit its own self in time to do a basic curb cut and let the water go onto the grass. So I'm glad there's a wide variety of people in this room, because we're going to all need to work together to overcome institutional barriers. Water does not respect property or the law. And so if we're going to solve these complex problems, we're going to have to work together and break down some of these barriers. That's the hardest part of doing this, is breaking down these institutional barriers. The projects are pretty basic. I highly recommend the Watershed Management Group Water Harvesting Certification Program. Then you're going to know how to do it, right? Next is you need to get somebody to allow you to do it. That takes more of our time than doing the darn project, even though I've got a bag of money.
Right? Yeah, building all of those relationships.
Yeah, but hopefully this will become more popular, and then maybe one day people will start fighting over the water instead of everybody trying to put it on the city, and you have to build the giant ugly concrete things. So there's Fiona Bailey's side yard. This is a cool one. Snow melt. If you're lucky, you get a few inches of snow in Silver City, and then in the winter, since New Mexico has more sunny days in the winter than any other state, you'll have a sunny day and the snow will melt. It'll go down the street gutter, collect at the corner, make potholes, and a traffic safety hazard. But this lady gets that water, all of it is going in, all the snow melt. Every winter afternoon, all the snow melt goes into her yard and soaks deeply into the ground, where she grows vegetables. This is our 1935 sidewalk. This is where a landowner concreted that median. We took that concrete out. Now we cut the concrete into squares and put it on Grant County goodies, and people come and collect it and they build patios with it. So we're not taking it to the dump anymore. Okay. What's that? It's oil. Somebody in the watershed has an old car and a drippy oil pan, and instead of that flowing into our live stream, it's soaking into the ground, where it has been proven that that level of petrochemicals is bioremediated by the topsoil. That's a much better place for that to go. And the plants will consume that. This is Noble Park in Silver City, where our streets director, Peter Pena, said, well, after you make this water harvesting basin, why don't you cut a hole in the wall? And so now this basin is a sediment cleanout basin. On the downslope side of that, sediment-free water now irrigates the grass in a city park. So the city can save money on their water bill. It works pretty good in the winter, works pretty good in the summer. So this project was built in 2012, cut the curb, went to a clean out basin, put a pipe under the wall. That's an elderberry bush. So this is in 2013, 5 years later. Before water harvesting, after water harvesting, we made the house disappear. That's it. My mind doesn't work like policies. I rail against the policy.
Love it.
I try to do something that makes sense, and then I get a stumbling block. So I'm looking to work with people who want to get the problem solved. There's a policy in cities where the city has to accept any stormwater that comes from private onto the city street, and the city will not put water onto anybody's private land. That's like a city policy.
Then
Your streets department, your parks department should be looking it up. Parks department. That's city street onto city park. Try to grab all that water. Okay? That should be easy, right? Harder is for your street department to pay attention to places in the neighborhood where there's the perfect yard, and you look over the fence and you go, oh, that lady is a good gardener. She'll make this just as good. I look for places where you know that person is going to make it look beautiful. But see, if you're the city, you're not supposed to do that. There's a policy. You're lockstep. You have to stay on your right of way, and you have to build bigger and uglier concrete things all the way down the line instead of turning off the problem at its source.
thanks.
I have a comment about that. In El Paso and probably around here, there's a lot of neighborhoods that are built with on-site ponding. You know,
Yeah.
that's what the subdivisions call it. We call it on-site ponding. I call it rainwater harvesting. And I think that one of the policies or one of the things that's missing from those types of neighborhoods, it's based on feedback from the stormwater utility managers that we've worked with. Often the second or third homeowner in a neighborhood like that will reject that water wholeheartedly. They'll build walls to keep the water from coming off of the street into their yards that were designed to hold that water. Because, like you said, you know, there's a challenge with getting people to accept the water if they don't understand where it's coming from, because of this idea that it's going to bring mosquitoes and cause settling problems and all kinds of things that are true and legitimate. You know, these are legitimate concerns. So I think that the policy needs to be maybe an educational thing where people are not allowed to do that kind of change to their yard with on-site ponding. And I think that maybe the language needs to change and the way the yards are built needs to change in order to eliminate the risk of these nuisances from developing. So I guess the last thing I'll say about that is kind of a preview to my presentation, which has, following up on what Van said, is every landscape space in the public realm is an opportunity for green infrastructure, for water harvesting. Every landscape space, so that's medians, parkways, parks, the little tree wells in the parking lot at Walmart, which are actually elevated above the parking lot and starving for water.
Yeah.
All of these little spaces are opportunities for rainwater harvesting. And we need our cities and our designers and our people at Wilson and all the other engineering companies. I'm picking on Wilson because you guys are here. But lots of engineering companies and architects need to be thinking about changing the topography of our built environment from convex to concave. But I'll stop that.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Gosh.
That's what we need. We need a convex to concave policy.
Yeah. We've spent millions of dollars creating impervious surfaces such as roofs, driveways, sidewalks, streets, gutters. And what that has done in a porous drylands region is it has greatly increased surface runoff over the unbuilt environment. Wow! All of a sudden, there's a new, fantastic supply of water, which we darn sure need. So all you have to do, I don't have to build a street. I don't have to construct all these roofs. I cruise down the street with a concrete cutoff saw and a shovel in the back of my pickup truck, and I can tap into this supply and give it to everybody who wants it for 1/10,000th of the cost of creating this mess.
But
it's like dumpster diving. You know, you go down the street on trash day and you see something cool and you grab it. Well, this water is like, we're just dumpster diving this water that apparently nobody wants.
I'm not sure how to put this into a question, but it's about rainwater harvesting possible failures. I live in Los Cruces, and I'm down in the Sea Park, and on Tonway Avenue, there's old curb cuts that help and fill in with cement to keep the water out of the yard. So there was an effort made at one point in time to do that, but it failed for that neighborhood for whatever reason. So how do we? I would love to have the water in the yard, but it was a failure. So how do we address that failure? Or how do we address it so that we can avoid those failures, I guess? And maybe rehab people's mindset in the neighborhood.
So did y'all hear that? Davina is saying that there's streets in Las Cruces that were obviously built to do rainwater harvesting that have, instead of there being a rainwater harvesting retrofit to enable the rainwater harvesting, there was a retrofit to disable the rainwater harvesting. So presumably because there was some failure of the rainwater harvesting along the way somewhere. So I think that in order to address a situation like that, you need to, there's a problem there that needs to be studied. There's a root cause, what was going on there. And actually, I'm going to save our break time on my answer to that question, because I think I addressed some of that in my presentation. So I'll come back to that answer. So this is the cliffhanger. So that's good.
Davina, I want to make your question a more difficult to answer question than what about
I knew it.
Failures on our part, okay, we could darn sure mess up, okay? I bought errors and omission insurance, okay? Because I had to for that DOT dust mitigation job we're doing on the Lordsburg Playa I-10, whereas anyway, we're doing a water harvesting job along I-10 where it's the most dangerous stretch of road in New Mexico because of dust storms, and we're doing water harvesting to grow vegetation, to reduce wind shear stress, and reduce emissivity.
Right.
Where was I going with that? Okay, so I had to buy errors and omissions insurance. But see, you need to be very careful, and you need to think about every single thing that could possibly happen and make darn sure that you have an overflow that goes to a safe. If you follow the 8 water harvesting principles, that will guide you into an appropriate solution. Okay? Failures we've had, I've had idiot landowners go in and botch up my work. I've had, if the maintenance is not done, it's a stream, okay? And I'm going to talk more about shear stress and sediment transport tomorrow. But the streets are made out of little pieces of gravel glued together with asphalt glue, right? You drive on the street, it gets hot and cold. Guess what? It unravels into zillions of little pieces of gravel all the time, okay? Those collect in your inlet. If it's not shoveled out, what's going to happen is it's going to make a stream bank that's exactly at bank full stage for that stream, and grass is going to grow, and it's going to block off everything but a large storm. Okay, so that's a failure of the project getting water off the street. So maintenance, okay? So every single piece of infrastructure humans build probably needs maintenance from time to time. What we're doing is we're redirecting the maintenance from cleaning the streets, fixing potholes because water's going down the street, repaving the streets. That's a lot of expensive maintenance. Instead, we're redirecting it to maintenance that a homeowner can do with a shovel, or maybe one day, Las Cruces maintenance will be redirected to cruising through the neighborhood with a backhoe and a dump truck and a checklist and cleaning out the sediment traps, putting it into the dump truck instead of rushing around after a big storm trying to clean up the mess. And so we can change the location and timing of our maintenance.
Any other discussion about that?